The sun was setting over the city of New Haven, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The streets were alive with the hum of cars, the chatter of people heading home after a long day, and the occasional honk of impatience. Among the crowd, Daniel Harper walked with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He was an ordinary man in his early 30s, with messy brown hair that always seemed to defy any attempt at styling. His face carried the faint lines of someone who had seen enough of life to know it wasn't always fair, but hadn't given up on it yet. Daniel wasn't the kind of person who stood out in a crowd. He worked as a mechanic at a small garage downtown, fixing cars that most people would have written off as junk. But there was something about him. Maybe it was the way he asked questions no one else thought to ask, or the way he could stare at something until it gave up its secrets, that made him different, even if he didn't realize it himself. As he turned the corner onto Elm Street, heading toward the park for a quick walk before going home, something caught his eye. It wasn't loud or flashy. In fact, it was almost too quiet to notice. At the edge of the park, near the old oak tree, stood a figure. At first glance, it looked like just another person, maybe someone waiting for a friend or taking a break from the noise of the city. But as Daniel got closer, he realized it wasn't quite human. The figure shimmered, as though it were made of liquid metal reflecting the fading sunlight. Its shape shifted ever so slightly, not staying still for more than a second. One moment it looked male, tall and broad-shouldered, and the next it seemed softer, smaller, almost feminine. But what really set it apart were its eyes. They glowed faintly, a soft golden light that seemed to pierce through everything around it. People passed by without giving it a second look, their minds either ignoring it entirely or brushing it off as some trick of the light. But Daniel couldn't ignore it. He stopped walking, his feet rooted to the spot, and stared. The figure noticed him immediately. It turned its head slowly, deliberately, until its glowing eyes locked onto his. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy, charged with something Daniel couldn't explain. Finally, unable to stand the silence any longer, he spoke. "Who are you?" His voice came out steadier than he expected, though his heart was racing. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying him as though trying to decide whether he was worth answering. Then it spoke, its voice smooth and deep, resonating in a way that made Daniel's chest vibrate. "I am called Kale." "Kale," Daniel repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It sounded strange, alien even, though he couldn't say why. "And what exactly are you doing here?" "I observe," Kale replied simply, as if that explained everything. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Observe what? Us? Humans?" "Yes." "Well, aren't you special?" Daniel muttered under his breath. Louder, he added. "What makes you think we need observing? We're doing just fine on our own." Kale's expression, or what passed, for an expression on its shifting, metallic face, didn't change. "You are fragile, chaotic, unpredictable, yet you hold potential beyond measure. My creators wish to understand why." Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, narrowing his eyes. "Your creators? Let me guess. They're the ones pulling your strings, right? Telling you where to go, what to watch, how to act?" "They guide me," Kale said, his tone calm but firm. "But I am free to learn." "Free, huh?" Daniel snorted. "Sounds like freedom with a leash attached." Kale tilted his head again, this time looking genuinely curious. "You do not fear me?" "Nope," Daniel said, popping the P for emphasis. "Should I?" "Most humans react with awe or terror when they encounter my kind." "Yeah, well, I'm not most humans." Daniel took a step closer, squinting as he tried to get a better look at Kale's shifting form. "So what are you exactly? Some kind of alien? A robot? A god?" "I am none of those things," Kale said. "And all of them." "That clears things up," Daniel said dryly. "Look, Kale, whatever you are, you can't just show up here and start spying on us. This is our planet, our lives. You don't get to waltz in and act like you own the place." Kyle's glowing eyes flickered, as though processing Daniel's words. "You believe you are entitled to privacy. I believe we deserve respect, Daniel corrected. If you want to learn about us, fine, but do it the right way. Talk to us, ask questions. Don't just stand there watching like we're some science experiment. Kyle didn't respond immediately. Instead, it turned its gaze toward the park, where children laughed and chased each other while parents looked on. For a moment, Daniel wondered if he had pushed too far, if Kale would simply vanish or erase his memory or do whatever mysterious thing beings like him did when they were annoyed. But then Kale spoke again, his voice softer this time. You intrigue me, Daniel Harper. Most humans cower or worship when faced with my presence. You challenge me. And what's wrong with that? Daniel asked, shrugging. If you're supposed to be so advanced, then maybe you should know by now that humans don't take kindly to being treated like lab rats. Kale's form shimmered once more, settling into something that resembled a human male. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them until they were only a few feet apart. Up close, Daniel could see the intricate patterns swirling across Kale's skin, like galaxies trapped beneath glass. It was beautiful and unsettling at the same time. You are brave, Kyle said, his glowing eyes meeting Daniel's. Perhaps braver than I realized. Or maybe I'm just stubborn, Daniel said with a half smile. Either way, you've got a lot to learn about us if you're serious about this whole observing thing. Kale nodded slowly as though considering Daniel's words. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his form dissolving into the twilight until he was gone. Daniel stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where Kyle had been. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but one thing was certain. His life was about to get a lot more complicated. Over the next few days, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Kale. The encounter had been strange, unsettling even, but it stuck with him in a way he couldn't shake. He found himself replaying their conversation in his mind, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, he knew he hadn't. Kyle was real, and whatever Kale was, he wasn't human. Daniel tried to go about his normal routine, fixing cars at the garage, grabbing coffee from the diner on the corner, walking through the park in the evenings. But his thoughts kept drifting back to that shimmering figure under the old oak tree. What did Kyle mean when he said his creators wanted to understand humanity? Why had they chosen New Haven? And why had Kyle singled him out? The answers didn't come easily. In fact, they didn't come at all. But Kyle did. Every time Daniel was alone, whether he was sitting on a bench by the river or tinkering with an engine in the garage, Kale appeared. At first, Daniel was startled, unsure of what to expect. But as the encounters continued, he grew more comfortable, even though Kale's presence still made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. One evening, after closing up the garage, Daniel decided to take a walk through the park. The air was cool and the sky was painted in shades of purple and blue as night began to fall. He wasn't surprised when Kyle materialized beside him, his form shifting slightly as though trying to settle into something stable. You're persistent, Daniel said without looking at him. I'll give you that. I am here to learn, Kale replied, his voice calm and steady. And you are intriguing. Yeah, well, don't get too attached, Daniel muttered. I'm not exactly a fan of being studied. Kale tilted his head, studying Daniel with those glowing eyes. You do not trust me, would you? Daniel shot back. You show up out of nowhere, start talking about creators and observations, and expect me to just roll over and let you poke around in my brain? I have no desire to harm you, Kale said, only to understand. Understanding doesn't mean much if it comes at the cost of respect, Daniel said, stopping to face Kale. You keep saying your creators sent you to study us. But why? What do they want? Are they planning to invade? Experiment on us? Or are they just curious? Kyle hesitated, his form flickering for a moment. They seek knowledge. They wish to comprehend the chaos of your kind. Chaos? Daniel repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what you call it? I thought we were unpredictable and fragile. All of these things, Kale said, but also remarkable. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, skeptical. Remarkable.
How?
You create art, music, stories. You build cities and machines. You dream of things that do not exist and make them real. Kyle paused, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. Yet you destroy as easily as you create. You fight among yourselves. You harm your planet. You fear what you cannot control. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, well, nobody ever said humans were perfect, but we're trying. Isn't that worth something? It is, Kyle said slowly as though considering the idea for the first time. Perhaps that is why my creators are so fascinated by you. Fascinated enough to send you here? Daniel asked. Or are there others like you? More observers? There are others, Kyle admitted. But I am the only one who has interacted with a human. Daniel smirked. Lucky me. Kyle didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the last traces of sunlight were fading into darkness. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something resembling sadness, or maybe longing in Kale's expression. But before he could be sure, it was gone. Do you ever question them? Daniel asked after a while. Your creators. Do you ever wonder if they're wrong about us? I do not question, Kale said. I observe, I learn. But what if you learned something they didn't want you to know? Daniel pressed. What then? Kale's form shimmered again, this time more violently than before. It was as if the question unsettled him, though Daniel couldn't tell why. I am bound by their will, Kale said finally. I cannot disobey. Bound, Daniel repeated, shaking his head. Sounds like freedom with strings attached. Kale looked at him, his glowing eyes steady. You do not understand. My creators are vast, powerful, beyond your comprehension. Maybe, Daniel said. But power doesn't always mean right. Trust me. I've seen plenty of people with power use it for all the wrong reasons. Kyle didn't respond. Instead, he reached out a hand, as though to touch Daniel, but stopped short. His fingers shimmered, almost translucent, and Daniel instinctively took a step back. What are you doing? Daniel asked, his voice sharper now. I wish to understand, Kyle said. To feel what you feel. Well, you can't, Daniel said firmly. You're not human. You don't get to just dip your toes into our world and think you'll understand everything. I never claimed to, Kyle said. But I must try. Daniel stared at him, torn between frustration and curiosity. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave Kale standing there and forget about the whole thing. But another part, the stubborn, questioning part, wanted to know more. To see if Kale really was capable of understanding, or if he was just another observer content to watch from the sidelines without truly seeing. Fine, Daniel said after a long pause. If you're so interested in learning about us, then start asking questions, real ones, not this vague observe and report nonsense. Kale tilted his head again, intrigued. What would you have me ask? Daniel shrugged. Anything. Everything. Why do we fight? Why do we love? Why do we keep going, even when things seem impossible? Those are the kinds of questions you should be asking. Kale nodded slowly, as though processing Daniel's words. Very well. I will ask. Good, Daniel said, turning to walk away. Just remember, you wanted this. As he left the park, Daniel couldn't help but glance over his shoulder. Kale was still there, standing beneath the old oak tree, his glowing eyes watching silently. For a moment, Daniel wondered if he had made a mistake, opening the door to something he didn't fully understand. But then he shook his head, reminding himself that he had faced worse odds before. Whatever Kale was, whatever his creators wanted, Daniel wasn't going to back down. If they wanted to learn about humanity, they were going to have to deal with him, and that meant getting in line. Word about strange sightings began to spread across New Haven. At first, it was just whispers. People claiming they had seen figures that shimmered like sunlight on water, or moved in ways that didn't seem natural. Some thought they were ghosts, Others believed they were aliens. A few even claimed they were angels sent to watch over the city. But no one knew for sure. Laura Bennett, a journalist who worked for the local paper, had always been good at sniffing out stories. She had a knack for finding the truth behind rumors and turning them into headlines. So when she started hearing about the strange figures, she decided to investigate. It wasn't long before her search led her to Daniel Harper. Laura was in her late 20s, with sharp hazel eyes that missed nothing and a determination that could wear down even the most stubborn sources. She had known Daniel casually for years. They lived in the same neighborhood and occasionally ran into each other at the diner. But she had never given him much thought beyond polite small talk. That changed when she showed up at his door one evening clutching a stack of blurry photos and scribbled notes. "Daniel," she said as he opened the door, "we need to talk." He frowned, stepping aside to let her in. "What's this about, Laura?" She dropped the stack onto his coffee table and spread it out. "People are seeing things. Weird things. Figures that don't look human. I think they're connected to whatever's been going on around here lately." Daniel glanced at the photos, but didn't say anything. He already knew what, or rather, who they were. Kyle. And if people were starting to notice, things were about to get complicated. "You know something," Laura said, watching him closely. "Don't you?" Daniel hesitated. He had kept Kyle to himself for days, unsure of how much to share or whether anyone would believe him. But now, looking at Laura's determined expression, he realized he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. "They're real," he admitted finally. "Whatever you've been hearing, it's true." Laura leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Real? What do you mean, real? Are they aliens? Some kind of experiment?" "They're observers," Daniel said, choosing his words carefully. "They're here to study us." "Study us?" Laura repeated, incredulous. "Like spying?" "Not exactly," Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. "They're trying to understand us, why we do what we do, why we're different." Laura stared at him, her mind racing. "And you've seen them? Talked to them?" "One of them," Daniel corrected. "His name is Kale." Laura sat back, letting the information sink in. "This is huge, Daniel. If what you're saying is true, then we're not alone. There's something or someone out there watching us, and we have no idea what they want." "That's the thing," Daniel said, leaning forward. "I don't think they know either. They're just curious, but curiosity can be dangerous, especially when it comes from beings that see us as less than them." Laura nodded slowly, her reporter instincts kicking in. "So what do we do? Sit back and let them watch? Or do we fight back?" "We fight back," Daniel said firmly. "But we need help. We can't do this alone." Over the next few days, Daniel and Laura worked together to gather a small group of trusted individuals who were willing to stand against the observers. They called themselves the Resistance, though Daniel often joked that it sounded more like a bad sci-fi movie than a serious movement. Still, they were determined. The group met in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, far enough from prying eyes to avoid drawing attention. There were 7 of them in total, Daniel and Laura, along with 5 others who had their own reasons for wanting to fight back. Among them was Ryan, a former soldier with a quick temper and a knack for strategy. Mia, a tech-savvy college student who could hack into almost anything. And Jake, a quiet mechanic who worked at the same garage as Daniel. Each meeting was intense, filled with heated discussions about what they should do and how they could protect themselves. Mia suggested setting up cameras to monitor the observers' movements, while Ryan argued for something more direct, confrontation. Laura documented everything, taking notes and snapping photos to ensure they had evidence if things went south. Daniel listened to all of it, weighing the options carefully. He knew they couldn't afford to make mistakes. The observers weren't human and they didn't play by human rules. But they also weren't invincible. Kale had shown signs of uncertainty, of curiosity. If they could exploit that, they might have a chance. One night, as the group debated their next move, Daniel stood and held up a hand for silence. "We need to show them we're not afraid," he said, "that we won't sit back and let them treat us like lab rats. If they want to learn about us, fine, but they're going to have to earn it." "How do we do that?" Mia asked, adjusting her glasses. "It's not like we can just walk up to them and demand answers." "No," Daniel agreed, "but we can make them notice us. We can force them to interact, to really see us, not just watch us from the sidelines." Ryan nodded, cracking his knuckles. "I like it. Let's hit them where it hurts. Make them realize we're not some helpless species waiting to be studied." Laura frowned. "And what happens if they retaliate? What if they decide we're too much trouble and wipe us out?" "They won't," Daniel said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "Kale said they're here to learn, not destroy. If we push back, maybe they'll start treating us like equals instead of experiments." The group fell silent, considering his words. Finally, Mia spoke up. "All right, let's do it. But we need a plan. Something smart, not reckless." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's what we're here for." As the meeting broke up and everyone headed home, Daniel stayed behind, staring out the warehouse window at the darkened city. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The observers were powerful, mysterious, and unpredictable. But so were humans. And if there was one thing Daniel had learned from Kale, it was that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt, to fight, to survive. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Because if the observers wanted to understand humanity, they were about to get more than they bargained for. The resistance moved quickly, putting their plan into action. They knew they couldn't fight the observers directly. Not yet, anyway, but they could make their presence known. Using Mia's tech skills, they set up cameras and sensors around the city to track the observers' movements. Laura used her connections to spread the word subtly, planting stories in local blogs and forums about strange sightings. The goal wasn't to cause panic, but to make people aware. Awareness was power, and the resistance intended to use it. Daniel took the lead on the most dangerous part of the plan, confronting Kyle. He didn't tell the others what he was planning, knowing they would try to stop him. But he also knew that Kale was different from the others. If anyone could be reached, it was him. It happened one night in the park, under the same old oak tree where Daniel had first met Kale. The air was cool, and the city lights cast long shadows across the grass. Daniel stood there alone, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. Kyle appeared as he always did, his form shimmering faintly in the darkness. His glowing eyes locked onto Daniel immediately, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You've been avoiding me," Daniel said, finally breaking the silence. "I have not avoided you," Kale replied. "I have observed." "Yeah, well, your observing has gotten a lot more noticeable lately," Daniel said, crossing his arms over his chest. "People are starting to notice, and they're not happy." Kyle tilted his head slightly, studying. "Daniel, you told them." "Not everything," Daniel admitted, "but enough. They deserve to know, Kale. You can't just watch us like we're some kind of experiment. We're people." "I do not decide what is shared or hidden," Kale said. "That is not my purpose." "Then what is your purpose?" Daniel shot back. "What do your creators want? Are they planning to invade, to take over?" "No," Kyle said firmly. "They seek only understanding." "Well, understanding doesn't come from hiding in the shadows," Daniel said. "If they want to learn about us, they need to come out into the open, talk to us, treat us like equals." Kyle's form flickered, as though the idea unsettled him. Equality is not within their nature. "Then maybe they need to change," Daniel said, "because we're not going to sit back and let you study us like lab rats, not anymore." Kale stepped closer, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You challenge me again?" "That's what I do," Daniel said with a shrug. "I challenge things that don't make sense. And this, your creators watching us without our permission, it doesn't make sense." For a moment, Kyle didn't respond. He simply stood there, his shimmering form shifting ever so slightly, as though struggling to process Daniel's words. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke. "You intrigue me, Daniel Harper," Kyle said. "Most humans fear what they cannot control. Yet you resist." "And what's wrong with that?" Daniel asked. "Fear doesn't solve anything. Resistance does." Kyle hesitated, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. "Resistance is dangerous. So is complacency," Daniel shot back. "If you really want to understand us, then start by understanding this. We don't back down, not when it matters." Kale's form shimmered violently, as though the weight of Daniel's words was too much to bear. For the first time, Daniel thought he saw something resembling doubt, or perhaps even admiration, in the being's expression. "You risk much by speaking this way," Kale said finally. "My creators will not tolerate defiance." "Then tell them to get in line," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're not afraid of them, and if they want to keep watching us, they're going to have to earn." Kale stared at him, his glowing eyes unwavering. Then slowly he nodded. "Very well. I will convey your message." "Good," Daniel said, stepping back. "And while you're at it, tell them something else. If they want to learn about humanity, they're going to have to do more than observe. They'll have to listen." Kyle didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the city, where lights twinkled in the distance. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something resembling sadness, or maybe longing, in Kale's expression. But before he could be sure, it was gone. "I will return," Kale said finally, his voice softer than usual, "when the time is right." With that, he vanished, his shimmering form dissolving into the night. Daniel stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where Kale had been. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. For certain, the observers had been warned, and if they didn't like it, that was their problem. Back at the warehouse, the rest of the resistance was waiting. When Daniel walked in, they all turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "Well?" Ryan asked, leaning forward. "What happened?" "I talked to Kale," Daniel said, dropping into a chair. "Told him we're done being studied without our permission. And," Laura prompted, "he's going to tell his creators," Daniel said. "Whether they listen is another story." Ryan snorted. "So we're just supposed to wait? Let them decide what to do next?" "For now," Daniel said. "But we're ready. If they push back, we push harder." Mia nodded, tapping away at her laptop. "The cameras are picking up more activity. Looks like they're moving around more than usual." "Good," Daniel said. "Let them know we're watching them too." The group fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The observers were powerful, mysterious, and unpredictable. But so were humans. And if there was one thing Daniel had learned from Kale, it was that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt, to fight, to survive. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Because if the observers wanted to understand humanity, they were about to get more than they bargained for. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. The observers began to withdraw. At first, it was subtle. Fewer sightings, less movement in the shadows. Then, one by one, they vanished entirely. The shimmering figures that had once haunted the edges of New Haven's streets and parks were gone, leaving behind only whispers and rumors. For a while, no one knew what to make of it. Had the resistance succeeded? Or was this just the calm before the storm? Daniel wasn't sure, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Kyle's disappearance was tied to their confrontation. Whatever message Kale had delivered to his creators, it seemed to have made an impact. Life in New Haven slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an event. People went back to their routines, brushing off the strange sightings as mass hysteria or some kind of prank. But those who had been part of the resistance knew better. They kept their cameras up, their sensors running, and their eyes open, just in case. Daniel tried to move on with his life too. He went back to fixing cars at the garage, spending quiet evenings alone in his apartment. But every time he passed the old oak tree in the park, he felt a pang of unease. Cale's words echoed in his mind. I will return. Daniel didn't know when, or if, it would happen, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't over yet. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Daniel found himself sitting on the same bench where he had first met Cale. He wasn't sure why he had come. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was hope. Either way, he sat there, staring at the empty space beneath the oak tree. You always did, like this spot. The voice came out of nowhere, soft but unmistakable. Daniel turned, his heart skipping a beat. Cale stood there, his shimmering form more stable than before, almost human. His glowing eyes locked onto Daniel's, and for a moment neither of them moved. Kyle, Daniel said finally, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. You're back. I am, Kyle replied, stepping closer, though not in the way you might expect. What does that mean? Daniel asked, standing to face him. My creators. They listened, Cale said. Your message reached them. And, Daniel pressed. What did they decide? They decided to change, Cale said, his voice softer now. To observe differently. To learn from your kind without interference. Daniel frowned, skeptical. That's it? Just like that? It was not easy, Kyle admitted. Change never is. But your defiance, it made them reconsider. You showed them that understanding requires more than watching. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, studying Cale carefully. So what happens now? Are you still here to observe? I am here to learn, Cale corrected, but not as before. I have been given freedom to ask, to listen, to feel. Freedom, Daniel repeated, raising an eyebrow. Or is it still a leash, just longer this time? Cale tilted his head, considering the question. Perhaps both, but it is progress. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. Progress is better than nothing, I guess. Kyle nodded slowly, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. You changed us, Daniel Harper. We will remember this moment. Good, Daniel said, smirking faintly. Maybe next time you'll think twice before treating us like lab rats. There will be no next time, Cale said firmly. Not like before. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. Then Daniel spoke again, his tone lighter this time. So, what now? You sticking around, or are you heading back to wherever you came from? I will remain, Cale said. For now. There is still much to learn. Well, don't get too comfortable, Daniel said, turning to walk away. And remember, you wanted this. As he left the park, Daniel couldn't help but glance over his shoulder. Kyle was still there, standing beneath the old oak tree, his glowing eyes watching silently. For a moment, Daniel wondered if he had made a mistake, opening the door to something he didn't fully understand. But then he shook his head, reminding himself that he had faced worse odds before. Whatever Cale was, whatever his creators wanted, Daniel wasn't going to back down. If they wanted to learn about humanity, they were going to have to deal with him, and that meant getting in line. In the months that followed, life in New Haven continued as it always had. The resistance disbanded, its members returning to their normal lives but staying connected, just in case. Laura wrote a series of articles about the strange sightings, careful to keep the truth hidden beneath layers of speculation. Ryan opened a small gym downtown, teaching self-defense classes to anyone willing to learn. Mia went back to school, her tech skills sharper than ever. And Jake stayed at the garage, working alongside Daniel and occasionally teasing him about his brush with the shiny guy. As for Daniel, he kept living his life, fixing cars and taking long walks through the park. Every now and then he would catch a glimpse of Kyle, standing quietly in the shadows or watching from a distance. They didn't speak often, But when they did, it was always meaningful. "You're different," Daniel said one evening, as they stood together under the old oak tree. "More human." "I am learning," Kyle replied, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "From you. From your kind." "Well, don't let it go to your head," Daniel said with a smirk. "We've still got plenty of flaws to show you." Kale tilted his head, his glowing eyes flickering faintly. "Flaws are part of what makes you remarkable." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, don't tell anyone I said so. I've got a reputation to maintain." Kale didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the city, where lights twinkled in the distance. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something resembling peace, or maybe even gratitude, in Kale's expression. But before he could be sure, it was gone. "You have taught me much," Kale said finally. "More than I expected." "Good," Daniel said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just don't forget who gave you the lesson." Kale nodded, his shimmering form flickering slightly as though smiling. Then without another word he turned and walked away, vanishing into the twilight. Daniel stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where Kale had been. He wasn't sure what the future held, for himself, for Kale, or for humanity, but one thing was certain. They had faced something greater than themselves and come out stronger for it. And if the observers ever returned, they would find a world ready to stand its ground.